Father Charles Murr. We're going to go to Italy. And this is about the Second World War, Angel. Okay, let's watch this. Okay, what the Vatican did. Okay, about the Jews. Angel!
Hello, Robert Moynihan in Rome, Italy on October 16th, Wednesday. Father Charles Murr, speaking from Spain, I believe, Father.
It is, speaking from Spain.
And October 16th is an important day in the history of Rome. The Second World War had been going for 3 years, and in September of 1943, the Germans decided to free Mussolini, who had been overthrown that summer and put in prison out in the middle of Italy in the Gran Sasso Mountains. They sent gliders in, soundlessly landing, overwhelming about 10 or 12 Italian soldiers and freeing Mussolini, bringing him back to Rome. And then Hitler sent his armies into Italy and took over Italy. And that extended the war into the 44 period when Anzio and these other battles, the Americans and the British had to come up through Sicily and through southern Italy. And they came into Rome in 1944. But on October 16th, just a month after the September takeover, on this day in 1943, so that's 57, 67, 77, 81 years ago. 81 years ago. Is that correct? 57.
That sounds right.
67, 77, 81 years ago today, the Jewish community of Rome was, many members of it were rounded up by the Gestapo and sent into exile in camps. And nevertheless, there were about 9,000 Jews in Rome, and only about 1,000 were rounded up.
Yes.
And the other 8,000, nearly all of them went to Catholic institutions, to monasteries, convents, into the Vatican. Some of them found their way out to Castel Gandolfo. And they spent from October to the following June in the care of the Roman Catholic Church. The Pope had ordered the church to open its doors to anyone who was seeking to avoid arrest and to be. The Jewish community found some safety in the Catholic institutions. But this remains a very controversial point in the history of the church and above all of Pope Pius XII, because some people think he didn't do enough. Would you like to discuss that, since today is the 81st anniversary of the roundup on the morning of October 16th, 1943. Father Murr.
Sure. The first thing that the Nazis did was they demanded 100 kilos of pure gold. Right? And if they got that, they promised that there would be no problem with the Jews. Well, they got that, in great part because of the Catholic Church. People gave gold, parishes that had gold items to be melted down, gave those, all with the Pope's approval, to save the Jews. Now you would say, you might just even ask at this point, why would the Holy Father, why would the Roman Catholic Church want to be involved or involve itself in saving the Jews? We're different religions. They have nothing to do with us, and we have very little to do with them, especially in those days. And the point is this, we have everything to do with saving them because they're human beings just like we are, and the church realized that immediately. And this is way before any talk of ecumenism. This is far before ecumenism was the key word of the day. We understood that these are brothers and sisters in need. And that the church immediately sounded the trumpet, get the gold. They came up with 100 kilos of gold. This is during wartime. And gave it to the Nazis. That still was not enough for them. They started rounding up Jews and sending them sending them to Poland, mostly to Auschwitz, I believe. And as soon as that happened, Pius XII immediately called again on all of the churches in Rome who could to open their doors to Jewish Romans. And not only that, he made sure that the four major basilicas, St. Peter's, St. Paul's outside the walls, St. Mary Major's, and St. John Lateran's, all housed as many Jewish families as they possibly could. Then he opened up Castel Gandolfo. Castel Gandolfo housed hundreds of Jews from Rome.
Yes.
They were all safe, Robert. They were all safe in these places because they were extraterritorial properties. They did not belong to Italy. They were diplomatically immune. No one could enter them. And for some reason, the Nazis respected that. That they respected. Now, here's the problem. And also, I don't know, hundreds of convents and monasteries opened their doors. You've got to also remember, Robert, there wasn't any food. There was no food. The Romans didn't have enough to eat. Yeah. And now all of a sudden, there are 9,000 Jews to feed 3 times a day. Yep. When you don't have food. So, and I know this from Mother Pasqualina. It's in my book, The Godmother.
Okay.
Pius XII asked her, she was put in charge of charities, of Catholic charities, asked her to take charge of that. And she did, as well as she could, of course, with the Holy Father being appraised of every step she took. The food came from, of all sources, Spain. It came from Generalissimo Francisco Franco. Why? Because Spain also was neutral during the war. Mm-hmm. People may not think that was, but it's during its own civil war and then the post-wars. Terrible, but they were neutral in the World War. Spain sent over, and again, keep in mind, Spain didn't have food. And this was a sacrifice for Spain to make. But Spain was the only one that could get food, any food, to feed 9,000 Jews, right? So that came in, did you know, Robert, that the Vatican has a seaport?
I do know that Civitavecchia, right?
Exactly. Well, ships from Spain, from Barcelona and I think even Seville, certainly Barcelona, were shipped out to Civitavecchia, and that grain was brought to the Vatican, was brought to convents and monasteries, and bread and whatever they could, food, grains they were able to get, they were made into food. And that food was sent out daily to all of the places where the Jewish families were gathered. So it's one thing to say, yes, we'll take care of these people, but it's another thing to maintain them and to feed them for 9 months. Yeah. Look, I've had house guests, Robert, I've had house guests here. I've had house guests here for 3 days. And it's difficult. It's difficult. It gets a little bit, what do we say, that house guests and fish, right? After 3 days. Anyway, but 9 months, and Mother Pasqualina made sure that everyone had food, that everything was rationed, and there was also medical care. People were sick, women were having children. It was a real sacrifice to have undergone that. You can say it in one breath. Yes, we took care of these Jewish families, but to do it every day for 9 months was nothing easy. So they saved all of those Jews and Jewish families from extinction because they would have been taken away. There's no question. 1,000 of them were rounded up and put into boxcars and sent north. Right? Nobody ever heard from them again. Now, after the war, the Jewish community of Rome couldn't praise Pius XII enough for what he had done, because they realized perfectly well that were it not for him and for his magnanimity and greatness, his greatness and love for them, they would have all perished. There was just no question of that.
And something changed then after that.
Something did change after that, and let me get to that. Let me get to that. But let me just tell you this too. During the war, the Vatican also had a little, what would you call it? A battalion, I guess, of English and American soldiers living inside. Right? But as a matter of fact, here's a curious fact. I was a guide for 5 years in the Vatican, right, in the Sistine Chapel and in the gardens. I took for 5 years. I took kind of special people through those places. Do you know in the gardens, the Vatican gardens, where the helicopter port is?
Yes, right.
The heliport is
at the very top.
Right. Well, you know why that's there? Do you know why that's there? The English were they were prisoners of war, but they couldn't leave the Vatican. They got so bored, they leveled off that whole area and made a tennis court for English officers, so they could play tennis. Anyway, and after the war, they continued the leveling off and turned it into a heliport for the Pope's trips back and forth. But all of these things happened. Mother Pasqualina also told me what really changed, because Pope Pius XII also proclaimed himself through diplomatic means that over 250,000 baptismal certificates were to be falsified and given to Jews throughout Europe so that they could leave, they could get passports as baptized Catholics and get out of the country. Many of those, hundreds of 100 to 200,000 at least of those Jews who escaped, owed that also to Pius XII. The problem was this. Here's what happened during the war. The first, I may be wrong on this, they weren't the first, but there were some of the first people to protest loudly that the Nazis were persecuting the Jews, rounding them up, and then killing them in concentration camps. They worked them to death as laborers and then disposed of them. Were the Dutch bishops. Holland was the first place, right? Well, the Dutch bishops found out about this. They reported it immediately through diplomatic means to the Vatican. And the Vatican, the Pope, denounced that roundup of Jews in Holland. Within days, the persecution against the Jews in Holland augmented tremendously. They put more pressure on and got 3 times the amount of Jews out and sent to concentration camps. So much so that the Dutch bishops wrote to the Pope, or contacted him by some means, asking him to please be quiet. Please be quiet, because his silence could save lives. When he spoke, they rounded up 3 times as many and deported them. So that was the first thing, to be silent. So you've got to play these games, these diplomatic games. How can you win? How can you save more lives? We're looking at this, how many years? 70 years after, 80 years after. You just said it's 81 years. 81 years after the fact. And we're saying, oh, this should have been done, that should have been done. Well, just a minute. Nobody knew how all of this was going to turn out. Nobody knew what exactly, brochures didn't come out with the proclamation of a war. Nobody knew what exactly to do. They knew who to be careful of and how to survive. There were terrible times. The church did what the church could do. And also, let me put it this way, throughout Europe, France, even in Germany, France, Holland, everywhere. Every nation that could, Hungary, who could help the Jewish population, did so. They took them in, they hid them, etc., etc. You've got a man by the name of what is his name? Soros, George Soros?
George Soros, yes.
Just imagine this character. His family his father procured for him one of those baptismal certificates that the Pope had issued, so that his son, who is George Soros, could pass as a Christian. I think George Soros lost all of his family. They were all taken away except for him, with that passport procured by a Catholic baptismal certificate. Anything that could be done was done. Now, let me just point out something else that's really overlooked, and it can't be overlooked. In those concentration camps, we hear the numbers: 6 million Jews were killed, were put to death. If it's 5 Jews were put to death, it's a horrendous number. The number doesn't count. The fact that they were put to death is outrageous. It's insane, and it shows man's inhumanity to man. But they were millions of them. Just stop for a second. Among those in Auschwitz, especially in Auschwitz, we had 5,000 Catholic priests round up. Catholic priests who denounced the Nazis for their inhumane treatment of Jews and of human rights. As soon as a priest spoke up on Monday, if he spoke on his Sunday homily or sermon, on Monday he found himself in a concentration camp. Now, I want you just to think for a moment, what is the population of New York City? Let's throw out a number and say 15 million people, okay? I think it's more than that, but let's say it's 15 million people, the metropolitan area. Do you think for one moment that 15 million people, and of those, maybe 40% are Catholic, do you think we have 5,000 priests in that area? Of course we don't. 5,000 priests is a lot of parishes, a lot of schools, a lot of institutions. They were all round up. Anybody who dared to pronounce something against the Nazis were round up. There's not a word about those 5,000 priests said. We also lost 4 million Polish Catholics, soldiers, were in concentration camps. And from what I just talked to somebody not long ago from here in Spain, from the gypsy community, from the gypsies. And they claim to have lost 2.5 million gypsies during the war. Hitler also didn't like gypsies. And this is insane. It was just insane. Now, here's the thing. All of these people were lost. So, of course, even if it would be just the Jewish people, just the Jews, we should be outraged. There's no question of that. But this was against all of humanity also. It wasn't just against the Jews. 5,000 Catholic priests and nuns. Mother Pasqualina told me also, Robert, that after the war, the Pope asked her in a very special way to help put back, the church had to be put back together. The church in all of these countries had to be put back together. It was a disaster, everything. Sister Pasqualina, Mother Pasqualina, took great strides to help, and personally, as much as she could, convents of nuns who had been raped, murdered by Nazi soldiers. Right? These atrocities happened all over Europe. You know what she told me, much to my delight as an American? She said, you know, in all of those atrocities, there was never one incident that I heard of Americans or Englishmen acting that way. Right? Anyway, all of this these were terrible times and terribly done. Now, here's what happened. After the war, I want to remember the bishop's name. I think it was Huder.
Hudal. Hudal.
Hudal, that's it. He was living in Rome. He was a Nazi sympathizer. He was a Nazi sympathizer, right?
Yeah.
And now, look, we're at that time, what were we? We were 500 million Catholics in the world. You think we're not going to have a few losers and cuckoos among us? 500 million people? Yes, you can be sure we did.
We don't have any. We don't have any today, Father.
No. Today it's all clear. Today it's all clear. We're all wonderful. Of course it's like a family. In every family, you've got the crazy uncle, and you've got the this one. This is it. Well, this Nazi sympathizer, I believe he was German. I don't think he was Austrian. I believe he was German. Was in Rome, and he started helping Nazis, former Nazi war criminals, to escape and to go to places such as Argentina, Brazil, Chile, mostly into Latin America.
Yeah.
That when it came known was explosive, and Pope Pius put an end to that. But there was a sort of, what did they call it? The something railroad of getting these. What is it?
The rat line. The rat line.
The rat line, exactly. A good term for it. Anyway, that was put to rest. It was done. But the scandal that he had made doing that was terrible. But what I'm trying to say is, and then I'll stop because I'm monopolizing all of the time here. What I'm trying to say is that the church did as much as the church could possibly do. When Pius XII died, Golda Meir in Israel declared the Pope an honest Gentile and proclaimed a holiday in Israel to feast it. It was just amazing, everything that was done. Everything had to be done quietly. If it was to be done and to be efficacious, it was to be done quietly. It was to be done under the radar. And people criticize today, the Pope should have said this. Well, the Pope, you also know, Robert, that the Pope had an escape plan to go to Chicago. Should the Nazis, that's true. Should the Nazis come in and take over the Vatican, which was a real threat, right?
Yes.
I mean, nobody knew what anything was going to be. But in spite of all of that, the church, some countless priests and good bishops did all they could to help our Jewish brothers and sisters, to help Protestants, to help atheists, to help anybody. The thing was to save lives. And I think they did a great job given those insane circumstances. And Pius XII should be canonized for all he did. When the war was finished, let me just end with this. When the war was finished, let me see if this sounds very, very anti-Semitic to you on the part of Pius XII. When the war was finished, Rabbi Zoli of Rome, the head rabbi of Rome, the chief rabbi of Rome, and you can see the synagogue on the Tiber River, the chief rabbi of Rome and his entire family converted to Catholicism. And he, as a baptismal name, the rabbi took as a baptismal name Eugene, for Eugenio Pacelli, in thanksgiving to the Pope for having saved his entire community, and his family, of course. So to say these horrible things against Pius XII is, to me, part of the black legend. Okay. The anti-Catholic black legend. All right, now I rest my case.
Well, you just came to a place that I wanted to bring up too, but I guess let's see what Jim Bertrand says here. Pius XII did so much. As Raymond Arroyo once remarked, after examining all the evidence, the question isn't did he do enough, but rather, was there anyone else who did more? No.
Perfect question. Perfect question. Isn't that great? Who else?
Thanks, Jeff.
Who else did more? Did Churchill do more? Did Roosevelt do more? No, come on.
Now, we've worked our way to a critical turning point in our discussion. We started by saying today is a special day, October 16th. It was about 6 a.m. this morning in 1943 that SS troops started to go and knock on the doors in the ghetto of Rome and pick up Jewish families, but 90% were getting away, and they were being saved by the Catholic Church. Years ago, I started to try to find out myself what had happened to these people, and I wondered if anyone was still alive. And we set up a little oral history project, and we interviewed about 10 or 12 of the Jews who had been in convents or monasteries who were
Really? Really?
Yes.
Fascinating.
Yes, and I went to Israel also, interviewed Michele Tagliacozzo, whose interview I gave to Gary Krupp, and it's on his website. I went to Haifa. I made the whole trip. We talked for a whole day, and he said that morning, my family told me that started to be knocking on the door. I went out the back door. They said, leave immediately. He was about 9 or 10 years old, I think. And he went down the back steps of the house, out, and they said, go to the Lateran. I'm not sure if he went to the Lateran, but he'd go to one of these Catholic houses that will take you in. And he said, I love Pius XII. And then this black legend that you referred to has now been proposed, I think, for reasons of bringing pressure on the Roman Catholic Church in general and on the whole idea of certain moral questions in our modern world. What I mean by that is if you strike one pope and say he was evil, he was a kind of Nazi, then people start to wonder, that's the black legend you referred to. He was somehow, and if a one pope is evil, then maybe all the popes could be a little bit evil. It starts to kind of spread like one bad apple in a bag. And then if the whole church is led by evil popes, then the whole church may be evil. And this whole initiative of Jesus Christ may start to seem against human freedom, against human pleasure, and it's something that needs to be disbanded. The tax exemption needs to be eliminated. The schools need to be closed. And you know who did this? The communists did this.
Sure they didn't.
In Eastern Europe and in Russia, they closed all the Orthodox Christian schools. They arrested the people. They put them in concentration camps, not by the thousands, by the millions.
Yes.
And this was a radical excising of the religious and Christian element in that society, Eastern Europe, Russia, Ukraine. And I was thinking, what's happening with Pius XII is somehow like the boy in Holland who put his finger in the dike. We must stop right here with Pius XII, because, again, if you have a pope who's accused of being cruel, of allowing massive death, of being indifferent to the death of Jewish children and Jewish women who the Nazis are tracking down, then he is regarded as an evil pope. And then the other popes are evil.
Angel, you like the first part, Angel? We have second part, Angel. Angel! Brother Charles Moore, whatever. Okay, we have a very nice story here. Okay? Okay.